if I wasn't the problem, why wouldn't they make clothes for me, right? So I'm trying to sort of cut off this idea that the problem is your body, because it's not.
Welcome to Season 3 of Talking About Kids. I am your host, R. Bradley Snyder, researcher, activist, and author of The 5 Simple Truths of Raising Kids. Participation in sports declines during adolescence. There are many reasons for this, and I want to address all of them, because when the kids stop playing sports, they miss out on the mental and physical benefits that sports afford. My guest today is Pam Luk. Pam believes that one of the reasons adolescents quit sports is that athletic wear for kids does a poor job of accommodating different body types. Pam shares her story and what she did to address this problem next. This podcast was sponsored in part by the Arizona Department of Health Services Must Stop Bullying campaign through its Title V Maternal and Child Health Program. For more information, go to muststopbullying.org. And now, the interview.
I grew up playing soccer. I played soccer all the way through high school and was on the junior varsity and varsity team. And I also danced through my entire youth as well. And by the time I got to high school, I was struggling to find athletic wear that fit. I had to shop in the men's section. I was a goalkeeper on the team. So by high school, I had to shop in the men's section to try and find, a shirt and pants that would fit. And it was obviously an awkward experience. And then, fast forward 30 years later, I have a daughter in a bigger body, and she loves to dance and do active sports. And we're still struggling to find athletic wear that fits her. And so I said, how is this still a problem? There's so many advances that we made in so many different areas. Like, how is this still a problem for kids that want to play sports? And so I decided that since no one else was going to do anything about it, I would take on something that I knew nothing about and just try to make a difference, because I'm just so passionate about it, and sort of countering this idea that kids in bigger bodies don't like to move their bodies, don't like activities in sports. And that's just not been my experience. So I feel like it's a barrier that keeps kids from doing these things.
Yeah, well, absolutely. And there's actually a lot that I want to talk about that, because I do think that it's not just body type that sometimes stops kids, especially older kids, adolescents, from participating in sports, but it's kind of the entire sports system. At some point, we don't let our kids just play. They have to get into elite leagues. They have to be on this competitive tryout team, and there's very little room for just the kind of social, recreational play. But getting back to your particular interest here, this is, even talking about different body types can be difficult. What are your tips for introducing or discussing body diversity with kids?
Well, the good news is there's a lot more books about body diversity now, particularly for younger children. And I'm starting to see some of things, better options for older kids as well. So it's a little different from when I was a child. There are books that start to introduce this idea that all bodies are good bodies, and some bodies are tall and short and thin and fat. And so I think it's just starting early with those conversations that there's no wrong way to have a body. And then sort of part of that whole piece of work that we all need to do is just thinking about, for a lot of folks, how we talk about our own bodies in front of our kids. I mean, I know a lot of kids we have concerns about kids being bullied in school, which is real, and what kids see in the media. But for most people, most kids in bigger bodies, the experiences that were most difficult for them were things they heard from their own family members. Either how your mom talks about her body or your grandmother making comments. So for the adults, I say really start to get curious about whose bodies you're talking about and how you're talking about them. And I strongly suggest that we all just stop. We all just need to stop talking about bodies, particularly other people's bodies. And so there's this idea of how we talk about, when we talk about things, we talk about them more generally, right? That all bodies are good bodies. We don't talk about other individual bodies, and just broadening sort of the kind of bodies that you see in the media you consume, even on social media like Instagram. Look at the kinds of bodies you see in your feed every day. That's something you have some control over. And there are a large number of plus size athletes. If you check out my feed, you can follow some of the same people I follow. But are you seeing people with different body types outside doing activities? Are you just even seeing different body types on a daily basis?
I do think, though, that, and I think those are all excellent points and great suggestions. But then, to your experience, there is going to come that moment when you might be with your own kid or you're working with kids, and now it comes time to hand out the school uniforms or the team uniforms, or now it comes time to shop for something to wear when you're out running or jogging or playing or riding bikes. And you're going to encounter a rack or a box of uniforms that are narrow in their sizes. What sort of things do you recommend saying to kids in those instances?
Yeah, I'll start with uniforms, because I will say one of the tough things when you're a parent of a child in a different body type and in a bigger body type, I have to be thinking so far ahead. Really. I mean, in that instance, I would reach out to the program or the school and say, what size uniforms do you have in stock? My child will probably need an extra large. My child will probably need a bigger size. So it's important for me to sort of get out in front of that so that there's time for the school and the program to make that sort of adjustment. And that's just something that you sort of have to, unfortunately, learn how to advocate for your own child. And so for me, regardless of how nervous or uncomfortable I am, I just have gotten really. And that's the nice thing. I can send emails a lot of the time, so I don't have to. I have time to sort of compose my ideas and what I want to say. And so, but I'll send emails in advance, particularly for uniforms. And for shopping, it's tricky. I mean, I think it's tough. So one of the nice things, I guess, coming out of the pandemic is we've all sort of gotten used to more online shopping.
Yeah.
And I like to, as much as I can, sort of, with younger kids in particular, it gets tougher when teens want to do their own thing. But for kids that are maybe in elementary school or the lower junior high levels, I will buy online and get things in a variety of sizes. And so it turns into almost sort of a personal shopping at home experience where if something doesn't fit quite right, I've ordered it in a couple of sizes, and I will speak to the privilege that allows me to do that, I, have enough money to order a couple of sizes and then we'll return the things that don't fit. But what it allows for, or even if you're in person, trying to grab a couple of different styles and sizes. So it's not this doesn't fit. So let's try this one instead. So there's a fairly quick pivot to something that's going to fit a little bit better. And, and as kids get older, you have to start talking about there aren't as many options for kids in bigger bodies, and it's really not okay. And so it's a tough conversation that's going to have to happen at some point, but then trying to focus on the brands and the styles that are trying to, bring clothes that fit you. And the problem is always the clothing and not your body, which is another reason why I started this company, because the message you get is I'm the problem.
Right.
If I wasn't the problem, why wouldn't they make clothes for me? Right. So I'm trying to sort of cut off this idea that the problem is your body, because it's not.
And I do think it's interesting. This is something that I've witnessed, firsthand. You're starting your first day of high school, and there's a mandatory gym outfit that gets handed out to all the students, and it's in 3 sizes. And you look around at the staff, and the faculty, we're all a variety. We're not 3 sizes on the staff, but we expect our kids to be these 3 sizes. And the 3 sizes are also really kind of unfair because they expand in all directions at equal rates. So they expect somebody to grow in height as they grow, as they are. So you've got somebody who might be wider, and now they're in an outfit that goes all the way down to their feet because we expect them to also be 6 feet tall or something like that. So it's terrible. And I want to, at a moment, get at how you went about solving some of these issues with your own line of clothing. But I do want to take this moment to say, we put a lot on our teachers. I know that a lot of my listeners are teachers, and I understand it. And I spent a lot of time on this podcast sympathizing. But for my teachers out there, if you have a little bit of extra energy, take a moment and find out what kind of outfits, what kind of uniforms, what kind of school uniforms even are being required of the students, and see if you can do something to make sure that there's a greater diversity of sizes. But Pam, let me get back to your athletic clothing company. How did you go about kind of solving this problem of there not being a diversity of clothing sizes? What were the first steps that you took, and sort of where did you end up in terms of how you sized the things and what you made available?
I'll start by saying I chose athletic wear intentionally. Like, there's a strong need for bigger size clothing for kids, plus size kids anyway, but I intentionally chose athletic wear because it's a label that kids in bigger bodies don't get to wear very often. And I think that the idea that you can't play these sports that you love, it disconnects you from, your friends and your classmates. And that's such a big challenge and a problem. So I did focus intentionally on athletic wear, and it was just, honestly, it's a ton of trial and error. And I don't have a lot of sizes to pull from. A lot of people that work in designing clothing will go and pull something off the rack in their size and say, I like the shape of this. Let's change the sleeve. Let's change the collar. My problem was most brands stop at around a size 2X. And I go all the way up to a 4X in my line currently. And so where do you go? So I was ordering double extra large size women's shorts. I was ordering double extra large size men's shorts, and I was ordering things in a whole bunch of different sizes as a starting point, and saying, to your point, we don't need all this length. We've all seen the kids that have to go to camp and order an adult size t-shirt, and the t-shirt goes all the way to their knees.
Yeah.
Right. So we don't need all of this length. So it's taking something, and I jokingly refer to it as like a Frankensteining of things. I take this length is wrong, but the body shape is right, or the sleeves are too long, so we're going to shorten those. And so it's a tremendous amount of trial and error. And also knowing, having been plus size my whole life, what are some of the problem areas? And to your point, for whatever reason, they think I need the inseam on my pants to grow 4 inches.
Right.
When I really have not gotten taller. And most, particularly women, are, 5, 6-ish or under. And so I didn't expand, say, the inseam on the joggers very much as the sizes went up. And the other problem that comes up a lot is the rise is sort of that space between your crotch and your waistband in the front is called the rise. And a lot of times those measurements aren't taking into account that you have a belly, right? That kind of curves out. And so things tend to be very short-waisted. And it was one of the measurements that I worked very hard to get right, so that the shorts and pants accommodate your belly, and that we're adjusting that rise every time we adjust the size. But again, not adjusting the inseams so much so the length isn't dropping, and just really being mindful of sort of how long we're making everything, particularly t-shirts. And the good news is when you're working with athletic wear, it's fabric that has stretch. Okay. And so what that allows me to do is have a little bit of wiggle room. I don't have to get it like a school uniform, which is a woven cotton fabric and doesn't have as much give. Those I have to get much closer in terms of sizing. So I've given myself a little room to get more feedback on fit so that we can keep adjusting. But there's a forgiveness in that stretch that allows for me to keep learning as we grow the line.
And, I noticed you have pictures of young athletes on your website, and they look great in the clothing because, of course, if you're in clothing that fits you, you look better in those clothes. You look better, period. What sort of feedback have you been getting from parents and young athletes?
I think it's been interesting. I'm getting a lot of feedback too from adults who were these kids and were like, "Oh, it's the worst feeling in the world. Like you're worried about belly exposure, or you're worried about you just can't focus on playing
Right.
because you're focused on how uncomfortable you are, or how uncomfortable you feel." And so I think it's been great what I've heard so far, and I think it's just been the acknowledgement that somebody sees us
Yeah.
and somebody believes that we want to play these sports. I think that's the other piece, is that you feel like as a teenager, nobody thinks you play, right? Nobody thinks you can't possibly play soccer. You're not thin.
Right.
And so it's just really been, I think for a lot of folks, like I'm more comfortable, and thank you for just seeing what I love to do. And yeah, so it's been great.
That's fantastic. Yeah, and again, it gets into a lot of other problems that young people face when their body isn't conforming with whatever norm is expected in that environment. What other things do you think, besides advocating for clothes and uniforms and athletic apparel that fit, what are some other things that adults can do to help kids with all different kinds of bodies stay active in sports and physical activities?
Yeah, and I think you started to allude to this a little bit, is we really need to sort of take a look at how we organize activities and what we focus on. I mean, there was a really interesting survey done by a company called Excel that works with student athletes, and they asked them, what do you want out of your athletic experience as a student? And they talked about psychological safety, and they talked about communication, and they talk about, connection with other students and getting better at skills, and being challenged to get better. And all of those things are possible regardless of the size of your body. And you'll notice none of those kids said winning.
Right.
Right. So I think
Right.
part of it is we need to maybe rethink about the goals of the programs that we run and be really explicit and be like, look, we're here to see everybody improve in their skills, to see everybody, put out some physical activity and set personal goals. Everyone can improve their agility, their speed, their endurance, their ball handling, all those things. But we're going to have fun and everybody's going to play. And so maybe we can rethink about how we even approach particularly recreational programs. And I know there's that handful of schools that are feeders into Division I college. I get that. That is not the majority of schools. And it certainly isn't the majority of elementary and junior high programs. So I think there's sort of a disservice in how we approach these programs, and also parent behavior around what they're focusing on. And keeping all the approaches, like I said, weight neutral. So you can get better at all of these things as a sports or activity player, and it may not change your weight at all. So let's just leave that out of the picture and focus on building a team environment where we're communicating and we're connected and we're all improving in our skills and we're having some fun. This is supposed to be fun.
It's supposed to be fun, Pam. No, and I think I'm very frustrated with the growing emphasis on moving kids into competitive sports and competitive leagues at younger and younger ages, and the amount of resources that families feel that they need to devote to keeping their kid playing in the sport. Like, it used to be that there was a season for soccer and a season for baseball and a season for basketball and a season for football. And now if your kid shows any interest or aptitude towards baseball, for example, you have to play year round, and you have to go into these traveling teams, and or you somehow feel pressured, or you feel like you're not being a good parent if you don't get your kids in these different leagues. And one of the things that I think that's doing, Pam, is that with so many resources going into fewer and fewer sports, there is fewer sports for people to choose from. And this goes back, probably 30 years ago now, but Sports Illustrated 30 years ago did a issue where it was a bunch of different athletes, in very little clothing, but they were lined up next to each other. They were all elite in their sport, and they all had very different bodies. So your body as a jockey is a very different body than if you are a channel swimmer, for example. It very different than if you are a baseball player, very different than if you are a wrestler. And there are so many sports that are more suited to different body styles that we don't get to expose our kids to because we're spending hundreds, if not thousands of dollars to keep them on the competitive soccer team. So that's me. That's my little rant right there. But is this something, I'd like your advice on this too. Do you ever feel like we should be directing kids into different sports based on their body?
I mean, it's an interesting idea in that I do think, to your point, there are, certain bodies that do well, say, in different kinds of sports. Like one of the things where having a bigger body might work in your favor is something like we see it with people that are weightlifters. We see it some with discus and shot putting, and even like hikers, people that backpack. I once read an article about a woman who said, hiking long distances, she finally felt like she found something that her body was built for because she was broader and bigger and could easily carry her pack and it just felt like she found something where, she felt like her body size was almost an advantage. So I do think there is something sort of to that idea, but I also think that we sort of very quickly short circuit that we're acting like everyone's going to become a professional athlete. And so you'd steer these kids away from something. And I wish we could really just focus on letting you play the sports that you love to play, because there are adult leagues, rec leagues that you can continue to play in as an adult. And I see them as an important way to keep moving your body when you become an adult, which gets harder, right? Life comes at you and jobs and kids and dogs and family, and it's another way to stay connected, which again, as an adult is really tough. And so, if you love to play basketball, I don't want to steer you away from that because it's something that you really enjoy. And you can keep playing as an adult in the rec leagues that are, for adult, and they vary in degrees of competitiveness. So I think if you have a child that is struggling to feel good in the body they have, then maybe introducing something where they can feel stronger and more powerful could be a way to sort of counterbalance some of that. But I do think we all have sports that we just love to play. Yeah. And I would like to see that continue as long as we could anyway.
I mean, and that's why I think I stated it in the form of a question there, because I think that, one, I dislike homogeneity in public spaces, in schools. We know from some very good science that, schools that are, for example, very focused on football, these schools have horrible bullying problems, right? Because there are fewer opportunities for kids who aren't in the predominant sport of that school to demonstrate their value, to find success. And so it's easy to other them and to bully them. So I want both things, I think, to your point, Pam. If you are passionate about football, I want to find a way for you to play, even if you don't make this elite team. And the other thing I want for all kids is I want them to find that thing that they're good at. Maybe they think they're good at football because football is the only thing or that maybe they think they're passionate about football because that's the only thing in the community. I want to change that. But if they're really passionate about football, let's find a way to let them play somewhere, somehow, right? You started to share this already, but I had, when we were setting this up, I asked you to be thinking about what your vision for youth sports is. And I know that we've been talking about that now and you've shared a little bit, but what else would you add in terms of if you had that magic wand and could kind of change the landscape of youth sports, what other things would you change?
I mean, I think it's a couple of things. I think it's, access. We've talked about, like, is there a pool that you have access to if you want to learn to swim? Is there, outdoor spaces? And it's one of the things that comes up regularly. If there aren't parks where you can go and play basketball, or there's not some place where you can pick up a tennis racket. So how are we addressing access in both schools, but also in community spaces, in public spaces, and who has the ability to even just know that these other kinds of sports exist? And I think there's a real reckoning coming around coaching and sort of our approach to how we think about the focus of youth athletics and what it really needs to be. And so how are we holding coaches and such accountable for how they're treating their student athletes, and really just rethinking based on all the feedback that I shared from what students really want out of this experience. Like, how are we sort of realigning how we think about training coaches, and, you know, how are we holding them accountable to making this experience one that's more positive for kids? And I think just sort of finding ways to be more inclusive, right? That's a big piece of this for me. Because I think athletics it's not just about athletics, right? It's really sort of this opportunity for learning teamwork and leadership and just staying connected during a time when it can be hard as a kid. So, you know, that for me, in addition to all the other things we've talked about, I think are some of the things that are on my mind.
And, you know, regular listeners to the podcast will know that I don't really do commercials. So they will be surprised when I say, Pam, how do people find your apparel? How do they locate the great things that you've designed and made?
Well, I'll start by saying thank you for letting me share. Right now, the best thing to do is to head to emberandace.com. I'm only selling online currently because, as you can expect, as a small business, a brick and mortar store is very expensive. And so it lets me keep prices manageable and accessible for folks. And I did want to just also, people always ask me about the name Ember and Ace. And naming a business is like really hard. And so I was journaling a lot around it, and it came out of the word embrace, because my goal here is for these kids to embrace who they are, where they are. Your body's going to change a lot. So let's just embrace where you're at and find a way for you to stay connected. So they can head to emberandace.com.
Well, Pam, I really appreciate all the work that you've done and your thoughtful approach to this issue. And I'm very glad that Ember and Ace is out there for all the kids that can access it. So thank you very much. And thank you for talking to me today on Talking About Kids.
Thanks so much.
That was Pam Luk. For more information about Pam and her Ember and Ace clothing brand, please visit our website, talkingaboutkids.com. From there, you also can find out about upcoming episodes, suggest a topic, learn more about me and my books, or submit your questions for future guests. Our theme song, as always, is by the Senators. For more of their music, go to thesenatorsmusic.com. And remember, kids are young goats and young children. And the difference is that young goats are easier to manage.